But if you're taking aspirin, you don't have fever.
Well, it could be that, like if you've got the flu, so you've got flu symptoms, but the flu doesn't kill you, but the aspirin does. Oops. Well,
Sure.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of theories surrounding that, right? That it was just people just saying, I'm going to take 20 aspirin. Or it was people saying, I don't feel great, I'm going to take some aspirin, taking too many aspirin, killing themselves that way, even though they did have the flu. So, there are a lot of really interesting theories in terms of that.
Yeah, accidental treatments. Again, it's accidental cures and accidental treatment.
Yeah, and the thing that's really interesting, I think, about this is that it was mass hysteria.
It really was.
Because everybody was dying. And so when everybody's dying and the Surgeon General says, I'll just take some aspirin.
Yeah, you think the end is nigh. You'll take whatever you have to.
And you don't know.
So, so he made his announcement when?
In 1918.
In 1918.
When in 1918?
It was just before the October spike, so you can kind of assume that it was probably November.
Okay, but wasn't there a previous spike before the aspirin announcement?
No, there was the initial impact in about May of that year.
Yeah.
And there was a death toll, but it wasn't nearly as severe as the secondary event, which happened in the fall. And that's just before that event started really picking off. Now, again, as Devin said, it can't account for all of it.
No.
But it does help when, got to do this, then no wonder your numbers start climbing.
Even if it was just a fourth, right? Even if it's just a quarter of the people overdosing on aspirin, that adds so many more.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely.
So,
it's, did the October spike, was that replicated around the world, or was that just in the U.S.?
Yeah, it was
all
globally.
Around the world.
It was globally. Because remember, that was when the first one was a very mild impact. It didn't hit a lot of people. The second event is when it was suddenly people who hadn't been sick before were getting sick, and that's when it was reaching, up to 50% infectivity rates or death rates from infection, and just running rampant through everyone.
I've just found this. This is very fascinating to me. The Journal of the American Medical Association, right? That was one of the groups that was recommending aspirin.
Yeah.
The dose they were recommending was 1,000 milligrams every 3 hours, which is equivalent to 25 standard pills every hour today.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's
so it's a pretty solid theory that would have helped to add to the numbers.
Yeah, probably.
Because that's a lot. 25 pills in 24 hours. It's twice the daily dosage, which is considered to be like the higher edge of safe these days.
Yeah.
But it seems like even leaving the aspirin out, it seems like this was still an exceptionally deadly flu virus.
Oh, yeah, no, it was still the flu virus. It was just the aspirin was something that was going along with, it was none of the wheel on the bus.
But it sounds like, it sounds like it wasn't really the cause of the deadliness of this particular virus.
So let's talk a little bit about this actual virus.
Okay.
Because, we've touched on this a little bit, right? That when it boils down to it, the Spanish flu was just influenza. But it was clearly the most deadly version of influenza
that we've ever
encountered. Even recently, everybody I'm sure will remember the swine flu recently, which of course ended up being way scarier than it actually was.
True.
But,
or how about deadly SARS? Remember SARS?
Yeah, these are all strains of the same thing. But we should talk a little bit about what makes the Spanish flu specifically so interesting,
or what potentially could have made it so deadly. I think it's biology that made it so deadly. You're absolutely right, and I found some research that I think is really interesting. And bear with me because this is very scientific in the meat of it, and it's kind of hard to get through. So we'll do our best with this, and if I mispronounce something, I apologize.
This is why we're letting Steve do it, because my brain shuts off. So I apologize if I snore.
As we've talked about before, the flu itself typically will focus on people who have a compromised immune system. Therefore, the younger, the old.
Yeah.
Well, it's been theorized, and they've actually dug up some people who had the Spanish flu to try to figure this out. And that's where a number of these theories are coming from.
Okay.
And I don't know if you guys saw this, but they dug up people who had died of the Spanish flu in Alaska and had been buried in the permafrost.
Yeah.
And so they pulled them out and they started autopsying them. And of course, some of the bodies were in poor condition and they didn't find anything, and some were better than others. So there's all this research on, well, let's see what the virus actually did on these preserved corpses. And that's where this first theory that I've got comes in, is that it says that the Spanish flu featured what's referred to as a cytokine burst. And it happens at the site of infection. Cytokines are a special cellular signaling molecule in your body. Cytokines happen at the site of an infection, and that draws your white blood cells to come in and attack whatever the infection is.
Okay.
What this says is that there was literally an explosion of cytokines at the sites in the lungs where the influenza was happening. So therefore your body says, whoa, there is something seriously bad going on here, and I am going to go in and I am going to actually destroy the tissue of the lung because it was fighting this area so bad. Well, it's an airborne infection, which means that a lot of your lung is full of this infection. So therefore it's full, you've got these little explosions of cytokines going all over. So of course your body goes in and just tears it up, destroys your lungs. And when you get the flu, what happens? You get phlegm, and in pneumonia, you get fluid in the lungs. Well, your lungs are stopped up, and therefore they just start filling with fluid, and that's what would help kill you from this particular one. Your own body actually did so much damage to itself because of this weird feature of this strain of influenza.
So
that's why you die.
So this was basically a virus that gave you an autoimmune disease.
Yeah.
Essentially, yes.
That's what I'm curious about is like, is it possible that the people who died from this already had autoimmune disorders?
I don't know. I can't say that. All I can say is that this research, if you look at it, because we talked about it before, again, 20 to 40-year-olds were the hardest hit by the Spanish flu.
Yeah.
Who has the strongest immune system?
20 to 40-year-olds.
20 to 40. So they have a really robust immune system. So this happens and their body just goes into massive overdrive to attack the infection and inadvertently destroys its own lungs.
Wow.
I found this today, and it's really interesting because that would explain why the symptoms came on so fast and people died within a matter of hours to days of coming down with it because their body just literally went in and destroyed itself, and you couldn't breathe and you shut down because of it.
Wow.
I
That's
don't
a pretty
know how much,
solid theory.
Well, yeah, it's really solid. It's hard to say because we've never heard of something having a component like that in it before that caused such a severe reaction, other than, as you said, Devin, autoimmune issues, but those tend to not be as severe. Well, okay, bee stings and things like that.
Sure.
You're right. Actually, they are really severe, but it's just amazing that a flu could cause that massive and across a huge number of people. Because that's the problem, Joe. Okay, well, if they had an autoimmune disease before, the millions and millions and millions of people that died couldn't have all had the same autoimmune deficiency.
Well, there's a lot of different autoimmune deficiencies, but now that I think about it, I think that the autoimmune deficiencies would be represented in all age groups.
Yeah.
And not just people 20 to 40. So
that's also a really high number. I mean, and I don't know how much of that is because it was a long time ago and couldn't diagnose it, but I think autoimmune diseases affect like less than 5% of the population these days. And maybe it is because the Spanish flu killed all of these people, but I think that it's probably more realistic to say that, it's healthier. I mean, your body would know if your body attacks itself, it doesn't attack those viruses generally.
So I'm gonna have to do a little research into this and find out why. I mean, because let's face it, that's not a good immune system when it tears up your own tissue.
Well, but it's reacting. I mean, the immune system is a very single-minded machine, and it does what it has to do. But this would also explain why the young and the old didn't die as easily, because they didn't have a strong immune system. So their immune system couldn't go as ballistic on the infection. So therefore, they only suffered mild consequences, and they healed and didn't die. I don't know. I mean, that's just one theory about why this bug was so deadly. We've got a number of
we have a couple. Yeah, we have another one that says that it was a double team of viruses.
Okay.
Which is pretty interesting. So there was an autopsy of a group of people. I think it was like about 70 people or something like that. So the autopsy showed that the virus replicated not only in the upper respiratory tract, but also the lower respiratory tract, which was really similar to the way that the swine flu was behaving.
Okay.
That's one of the things that made it so deadly as opposed to a regular flu. The regular flu will usually just incubate either in the upper or the lower, or it'll move between the two, but it won't attack both at the same time.
So
you know, like when you get a cold, the flu, right? It's in your head for a while, and then it moves down, but it's never in the same place really at once. It's kind of in the middle sometimes, but the typical flu that you get your head cold, and then you get your chest cold, and that's it. So they found that there were two virus variants circulating in 1918. In one, there was a viral protein that was hemoglobin bound to the human receptor cells, which is kind of what you were talking about just a few minutes ago. And the other one didn't bind to the hemoglobins. So your body was trying to attack two different viruses that affected your body in two different ways at the same time. It would attack one, it can't attack both, essentially. So you were really sick in two different ways.
So essentially it's possible that people who caught the flu and didn't die just caught one of those variants, and people who died caught both of them?
Yes.
Have they done any serious digging up of corpses, trying to figure that out?
Well, again, that's the hard part. You keep asking the same thing, Joe, which is, well, let's dig some people up. Well, it was almost 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And the only ones that we found were these ones that were buried in the permafrost. There have been some discoveries of lung tissue that was in some military base in the back of a freezer that they meant to look at and they never got to, and they found it recently. But for the most part, there's nothing left.
Yeah. So, I mean, they preserve bodies, or in pandemics like this, they burn bodies, right? They destroy bodies because they're scared that the dead bodies will continue to propagate the disease. Sure.
You still need to feed the pigs.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Variants of this virus. And that one bound to your hemoglobin, like we were talking about earlier, it bound to your white blood cells, just made your body attack itself. And the other had the exact same symptoms, except for that it didn't actually bind to your blood. So there was one variant that was highly deadly, and another that wasn't.
Or maybe two variants that were not in and of themselves deadly, but together.
Well, no, it's one is very deadly. Devin's right. One's very deadly, and one is mildly deadly. But if you get them both in conjunction, then you're
screwed.
Done. You're done for.
Yeah. Although again, that still doesn't explain why people in the 20 to 40 age group, because you would think that you were just as statistically likely to catch both strains if you were, say, 10 years old or 80 years old.
That's true. Although I guess the thing that is the factor that we haven't really taken into consideration yet is who gets deployed. Right?
That's true.
Who's traveling the world?
This is true. And
who's in constant contact with people from everywhere.
Yeah. But actually, I don't know if you know this about kids, but they're kind of little disease vectors.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I happen to know that.
Yeah, you know that.
And I can tell you from my own recent personal experiences, having dealt with kids a lot recently, I had lots of little
diseases.
sicknesses, right? Like I would have a sniffle a week, and they'd be different sniffles, but I never got like really sick. Whereas like 5 years ago, I would get like really sick maybe twice a year. But when I got sick, it was like knocked on your butt, like in bed for a couple of days, just miserable sick. So and you kind of notice that's with kids, and I think older people as well. They're fairly constantly sick, but it's kind of just this like, I have a postnasal drip thing going on, as opposed to.
I also think that with healthy adults, what do we do when we're ill and we got to go to work? We go to work.
Yeah.
A lot of people still just go to work even though they're sick. Okay, so kids stay home.
Yeah.
And old people just say, I'm not going out today. I'm having chicken soup.
Yeah.
And I'm just staying in, and I'm going to stay in a blanket and read a book. Whereas the healthy people, oh God, I feel terrible, but I got to go to work. I go to work and I'm sick, and I work with Joe, and Joe's sick and he's got to go to work, and we both got separate strands, and we shake hands that morning. We both just got done wiping our nose with our hand, and we shake hands. Now we've given each other the other strain.
Yeah, actually,
we've done each other in.
Actually, I usually blow my nose in your coffee, dude. That's why whenever I get the flu, you always get it. But anyway, yeah.
You're terrible.
Yeah. Although, again, that doesn't quite explain it, because, say, the 10-year-old who stayed home from school, he's got a dad who's probably aged 20 to 40, who goes to the office, gets a disease from,
No, I'm not saying it's a perfect theory.
Yeah.
Well,
none of these are perfect.
But that's why I say it may have been a product of the war that was happening, because yes, in normal circumstances, the 20 to 40-year-old who's the father of the 10-year-old goes to work, gets
in this
sick,
case, he's off in a trench in World War
He's
I.
gone off to the war and gotten sick
point.
and hasn't seen his 10-year-old
forever.
That's
another interesting factoid I'd like to find out about, and I should have found out about this before we did the show, but what were the mortality rates between, say, our troops and civilians back home?
Sure.
It's about the same, actually.
Yeah.
It really didn't differentiate where you were. The death tolls in the country, regardless of your country of origin, where you were, your death toll from the Spanish flu was about the same all across the board.
Well, there you go, debunking our theories.
Well, no, here's the crazy thing. This is just a random factoid about it. There was only one place in the entire world that reported no deaths.
Okay, where was it?
American Samoa.
Huh.
They shut their borders down as soon as word about the Spanish flu came out, and they didn't get it. Japan basically shut their borders down and had a very small outbreak. And there was one other country that did the same thing. Basically, whoa, there's this really bad flu going on. Nobody's coming in. Everybody stay away. And they had very minimal rates of infection. I mean, American Samoa had no deaths, but the rest of them had very low numbers of deaths. So it might have been the weaker of the strains got in, but it didn't kill anybody because his big brother wasn't there to support it.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a good one, but there's also yet another one. And this one is actually, I think, kind of really credible. And that is the tuberculosis physician, Sir John Crofton, actually posited the theory that it was bacteria, not the flu virus itself, that was actually at the root of the big pandemic. So he said, it was
going to bacteria.
Bacteria. So it's not just virus, but virus and bacteria. So the bacteria is the Haemophilus, and I apologize if I murdered the pronunciation. Influenza. He claimed it was at the root of the great pandemic. He said it was bacteria that started the epidemic. During the pandemic, apparently 1/3 of patients who had this particular influenza were also found to have tuberculosis, and there were most likely other cases that went undiagnosed. That's
right. Tuberculosis was terrible at that time.
Yeah, it was a big thing. It was like, that was actually my grandfather had tuberculosis. Well, this is well after the whole Spanish flu thing.
Sure.
But they were actually going to lock him up.
Tuberculosis.
he agreed to move out to the desert. He lived in Southern California at the time, so he agreed to move out to the desert and basically place himself, under quarantine. And under quarantine, he basically didn't leave the house for a year or something like that.
Wow.
And his alternative was to go into an asylum where they had, which is what they did with people with TB back in